Hi guys, welcome to Nonantum Tech. My name is Ricky. Today I decided to upgrade the aesthetics of the main test bench for the channel. I used to use a CyberPower PC case, but at this point it's time to upgrade, and I think it looks so much better. So the case is the ThermalTake View 170 TG ARGB. This is the snow version of the case. So we're going to be building a system with the Ryzen 5 3500X paired with 16 gigabytes of RAM. This is going to be the 3200 megahertz T-Force Vulcan C, and I'm going to pair it with the Asus Strix 1070. This is the 8 gigabyte non-TI version of the card. And the board that I'm going to be using is the Asus Prime A320M-F, which is a super budget AM4 motherboard, so much so that it doesn't even have a header to use an M.2 drive. Instead we're going to have to use traditional SATA. So I have 512 gigabyte SSD Team Group, which is going to act as our boot drive. I also have a couple of repurposed 250 gigabyte SSDs that I put together on this frame. This is a Corsair 3-inch adapter for 2.5-inch SSDs, which is great to increase the amount of storage that we're going to have available in the case. When it comes to cooling, my preferred method is always going to be air-cooled. I feel like an AIO has the pump assembly that is more likely to fail, so I prefer air coolers because it gives me a visual cue that I can tell. If the fan stops spinning and you don't do anything about it, that's kind of on you. We're going to be installing the Thermalride Assassin X120R digital ARGB. This is going to be the white version of the fan. The nice thing about this is that it includes a digital gauge. You get the tower cooler itself, which has a couple of copper heat pipes that go into the middle of the die. And we're going to remove this right now before I forget, because that would be the last thing we want. Very good. It's a very nice, simple, minimalist look. You get one of these 120 millimeter RGB fans, which have the option of being able to be daisy chained with a 4-pin motherboard connector for the fan and the standard 3-pin ARGB headers, which can also be daisy chained. Include some mounting hardware for the different types of CPUs that they offer. This supports both AMD and Intel. Also included in the bag is a little bit of Thermalride thermal paste. I've used it before. This is going to be the one that I'm going to use for this build, so you guys can check out the overlay on the benchmark at the end of the video to get an idea of whether that is going to be good for you or not. So if you are installing a CPU, at least you don't have to buy the thermal paste. That helps. It also includes the instructions booklet and what I believe is a warranty sheet, but it's all in Chinese, so I don't understand it, unfortunately. So we're gonna have to ignore it. Very good. In terms of power supply, sticking with the used components list, we have the 6 Seasonic 80 Plus Gold power supply. All right, so it's time to start building. We're gonna get started with the core components of motherboard. So this is one of the reasons that I like saving boxes that the components come in, because in the case of the motherboard, use it to have a nice steady surface, but I'm still going to put an ESD bag underneath just to protect it as much as possible. You don't have ESD bags, the box itself should be fine. It's a good idea to save at least one of them and use the box that the motherboard comes in for to build the main core of the system. Things first, we're going to get started with the CPU. First, we're going to lift up the lever, prep up the socket to receive the CPU. We're going to be installing the Ryzen 5 3500X. So on the AM4 platform, you're going to see a small rectangle on the upper left hand corner, which is going to point you to the orientation in which the CPU has to be installed. Under the CPU, you're going to see the small rectangle, which is going to point you to match that to the rectangle on the motherboard. This also aligns with the small gaps in the pins CPU, which are going to align gaps over here on the socket itself. Kind of all goes hand in hand. Double check to make sure that we don't have any bent pins. With used components, you want to make sure that always do that before you install it, because especially with AM4, these pins, although they're very small and they are very delicate, it's possible to bend them back. So even if you bend one or two, you can use a razor blade to return those pins and they'll be fine. As long as even if they come off, the CPU will still be able to work. But obviously you're going to lose whatever those channels were, which could be critical. You definitely want to be careful with the pins no matter what. So we're going to start by dropping the CPU, matching, like I said, the two triangles. Just be gentle and let the CPU fall into place. You're going to feel it just slide down and it'll be fine. Once it slides down and it's secured into place, you're going to pull the lever on the side down and you're done. AM4 is very easy to install. Pins can be a little intimidating. They are more sturdy than they look on camera. It's always best to lean on the side of precaution. Make sure the RAM is in the open position and align the groove of the RAM with the groove on the RAM socket. And we're going to press down firmly on both ends, applying a reasonable amount of force, which would be something in the neighborhood of around 5 to 10 pounds of pressure, until you hear the pin come back into place. So you're applying a significant amount of pressure on the motherboard, and that's what the box underneath is for. So that way the weight, the pressure of that you apply on the motherboard gets distributed around in the box. Very good. Okay, so now we're gonna get the mounting hardware for the cooler. When coming from an AM4 platform, motherboard is gonna include the frame that you're gonna keep. Make sure that you have with you. It's this guy. So you're gonna reinstall that in the back of the motherboard and align it with the hole, and that is where the cooler is gonna mount into. We're gonna install the AM4, and we're gonna install the AM4 stand-ups by just dropping them on each of these corners. Then we're going to install this frame, which is where the actual cooler is going to be installed. The easiest way that I find to do it is just to put in at least one of the screws and tighten them by hand, just to a point where they're not going to fall out. It doesn't matter at this point. That's where we grab the screwdriver, tighten it up. Good. Okay, so now we're going to install the actual cooler itself, and like I said, I'm going to use the thermal paste that came with the cooler itself. You go as close to the center as possible and drop in a small pea size in the middle of the CPU. All right, make sure that we end up with the cooler in the correct orientation. Let's go ahead and drop it down onto the motherboard itself. Ideally, you want to try to apply equal amounts of pressure on each side of the cooler when you're installing it. Make sure the screws are nice and tight to the touch, but just try not to over tighten them to avoid potentially stripping them if you're going to need to remove any of the screws at any point in the future. CPU cooler appears to be controlled by one of the headers on the motherboard, on the USB headers on the motherboard. So appears like we have enough slack on the cable to be able to route it behind the motherboard. So we're going to take advantage of that and connect it when we have the inside of the case. And with that, we have a complete core for the motherboard. Are the most difficult components, the most critical, and the ones that you're most likely to get wrong. And if you were following along, you'll notice that it's actually relatively easy. It's just a matter of taking your time and making sure you're installing all the components as properly as you can. Very good. Okay, bring over the case. And it's a micro ATX / ITX case. It's a micro ATX case. And here it is. So the fans that are pre-installed in the case are some pretty nice quality 120mm ThermalTake with addressable ARGB. The top of the case, it includes a removable dust filter, which should help with maintenance and to keep it clean. The fans themselves come with the 3-pin connector for the motherboard for fans, which goes connected on the same port as the ones that have 4 pins. The ARGB is the 3-pin type of header from the motherboard. and it's the ones that you're able to daisy chain on the meaning that you can connect fans to each other. You don't have an RGB hub. This reduces the amount of connectors that you have to worry about. If your motherboard doesn't include this type of connectors, then you're going to have to find an adapter and provide it power directly from the power supply through a SATA connector. Those are the most common, although there are some available that Connector Molex seen them lately, and the SATA ones appear to be the most common and the most affordable ones at the moment. So okie dokie, here we go. We got a few pieces of mounting hardware, different sizes of screws, some additional standoffs, some zip ties. Personally, I'm going to avoid using zip ties just because it makes it so much more difficult to deal with. This appears to be designed for budget hardware because it includes the power connector, reset button, 2 USB 3s on the top, a headphone jack, and a microphone and a microphone barrel is the standard headphone jack adapter. But it would be nice to see a Type-C connector over here for something with a little bit more speed. In case of the motherboard that I happen to have, we don't need it, but I'm sure other people could potentially take advantage of it. And it's just sad to see that the ThermalTake didn't even consider into the case. But I guess they have to find ways to keep the price down. There's some space for cable management. You have limited space, pretty much limited to the height of the fans, which is about the that you have on a regular 120mm fan. This being said, that is better than some cases that I've worked on before. In terms of space on the basement, this is where you would install your power supply, and you have the space for a 3-inch hard drive, a space for a 2.5-inch, and there's also the space for another 2.5-inch SSD right over here on a small plate. So the amount of space for storage is a little bit limited. Down here you can also remove this the mounting point for the mounting bracket for the hard drive can be slide from left to right if you want to remove the screws underneath, but I feel like it's better to just give the power supply as much space as possible, because I don't think we're gonna have that much space for cable management in there. Okay, when I start building, first I want to separate all of the cables. Oh, I see. The case also includes this, it's a black splitter, so I think it kind of stand out in the case. So if you're only going to keep the fans that come on the case, you're going to have plenty of adapters to be able to connect the fans to just one header. Very good. So let's get to building. Here we go. So the way that I like to approach building is we're going to leave the front panel connectors out of the way as much as we can, and then we're going to put the rear panel back on. One of the worst things you can do with cables on a PC is pinching cables, because a lot of these cables are very delicate. Just be careful. And we're going to close the case back up, and now we're going to lay it on its side, and we're going to start the building process. So we're going to just push forward until we get a nice, clean, even distribution of this metal. This is just a piece of detachable metal. You don't really need to keep. I've never found a use for this, so just keep it out of your way because it can scratch your case. Once we're ready, you're going to bring in the motherboard just to make sure that everything aligns, and then the tabs match to where the PCIe is going to be, to where the graphics cards are connected. The motherboard is back out of the case. We're going to install our I/O shield. Notice that the shape of the I/O shield only allows you to install it in one direction. And usually, or at least in all the motherboards that I've ever used, this is always facing the bottom of the case. Of course, you'll want to check with your user manual. You're going to push the I/O shield. I/O should snap, but especially as it gets older, little places where it snaps are going to start wearing out, so you might not hear as much of a snap, especially with the hardware like this. This is used hardware, but you can still, as long as you can push from the other side and it doesn't come off, then you're good, because the motherboard itself is going to be applying pressure on the shield. And continuing with the theme, we're going to utilize the headphone adapter on the other side to guide us. We're going to utilize the headphone jack and try to keep ourselves as straight as possible. Make sure that we don't have any of the pins from the I/O shield out on the wrong place, make sure that all our ports are open, and then we're able to visually inspect to make sure that we can plug everything in. And now we can start installing the screws. I typically like to push in the screws onto their respective slots, even if I don't actually tighten them up. Just make sure that they sit inside and they're not touching any of the metal components. Okay, great. And with that, our motherboard is secured. Now we're gonna grab the little metal hook that comes with the fans, and this is where you want to start planning how you're going to route the cables to an extent. Have the letter up here on the top of the CPU. I have to connect that over there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cables on this side on the top, so that way they end up as close as possible to the header. Install the frame on you're going to install the frame on the slots facing the front of the fan. It snaps in properly, and then all the hot air is going to pull away from the case towards the fan that we already have pre-installed on the case. We're going to move all the cables out of the way. For now, I just take everything out. Keep everything as far away from you as possible. Good. Okay, so now we're going to remove the screw that this comes with over here. We're gonna go ahead and drop our graphics card. We're gonna line the groove on the PCIe connector down to the PCIe 16 lane. In this case, this motherboard only has one of them. But when the graphics cards are older, you're not gonna hear loud of a click. But the graphics card is ready. The case includes a frame where you can pre-install the fans before putting it in, which makes it a lot easier for installation. Now we've reinstalled the frame with the fans already installed in it. The system is starting to come along. I'm going to pass the cables through the slot above the CPU cooler. I'm going to install the two fans over here. We're going to put two fans on the top. We're going to align them together to make them really nice and straight. This also gives us an idea of the size of radiator that we are able to install. So this case only fits a small 240 millimeter AIO radiator in case you are planning to go down that route. And the maximum size of the GPU, it's going to be 340 millimeters. Although the 1070 looks pretty good in here though. Okay, very good. Alright, so we're going to the final steps of the build. Now we're going to install the power supply. I also went ahead and connected the 4-pin connector of the cable extensions. So it's important to plug in as many things as you can on the motherboard and then route everything all the way to the back so that way we can organize. Just leave it hanging there for now because I'm going to start plugging everything in. The cage for the hard drives that comes underneath is held on by 4 Phillips head screws, and we're going to go ahead and install all the SSDs on the frame whenever you're able to. It's always helpful to remove any components that you can from the case and work on them on the outside. So we're going to leave this to the side, and now we're going to install the power supply. So I'm going to keep the cables routed as far as possible from the case for now. Keep the fan of the power supply facing down. Note that the label is falling off. This is a used power supply. So we're going to go ahead and install the screws for the power supply. The cable is going to force the power supply to stay a little bit crooked as you're putting it in. So now we're going to start organizing everything. The most important thing is to connect as many things to their respective ports as much as possible, at least. So I'm going to start off with the connectors with the 8-pin on the graphics card. Make sure it's connected and pushed in all the way. And then we're going to move on to the 24-pin plug from the main power to the board. With this type of plugs, you want to take a look here on the side if you have access. Make sure that everything is nice and flush and that it's fitted in properly. So then you're going to grab these extensions and just route them to the nearest cable management route that the case provides, which in the case of the power connector is a little off. So it's gonna be extending up and then create the look that you want with the little brushes. And we're gonna utilize the fact that I like to keep as much of the plug as I can and make a nice little loop. So we're gonna go ahead and connect the PCIe connector now. Same thing, I'm gonna keep the 2 or 3 of the brushes out on the case side off, and then we're gonna push the rest into the hole provided by the case as we can out in the case. The glass is gonna push against it, so I don't have a GPU sag bracket, so that's something that I'm probably gonna add in the future. That's where you wanna start planning how your cables are gonna be routed. First thing we're gonna do is that we're gonna daisy chain everything. The way that I approach it is, when in doubt, plug it in. We don't have either the motherboard connection or the reset button. Like I said, we only have the single connector. So unfortunately in this case, we're gonna have to use this as just a SATA power RGB connection. And in the case of something like this, the single cable could actually work better. But I already have this, so I'm gonna have to use it. So we start off by locating the SATA on the power supply. They typically come in pairs. There's usually more than one connection in most power supplies, so in this case we have 2 different sets. So we're going to use one for the RGB, so not in this case. We can connect to one of the SATA ports, and then we're going to start connecting everything to each other. This is going to be very important to us because we're going to be able to interconnect the fans to each other that way. First we need to get rid of as much of the RGB by connecting it to each other as possible, and that way we can start to organize a little bit. We're going to start daisy chaining. The term that PC builders use is daisy chaining when it comes to connecting components to each other. With the fan plugs, keep the ones that have the daisy chainable connection separate, and then we're going to connect one of them to the 4-pin connector on the motherboard, and then we're going to interconnect everything with each other. This is where we're going to utilize the 4-way splitter that the case includes. And luckily we're going to keep it in the back so it shouldn't cause a problem. The reason that we're going through all this trouble is because the connections that are plugged to the motherboard or at this point are connected to both the CPU and the case fan ports. So if you interconnect everything to each other, you're going to be able to control it through the BIOS. Then you'll be able to see the fan speed and things like that. It's very useful, so you can get an idea of the kind of performance that you're getting, and you can adjust fan speed. We're going to interconnect everything as much as we can, like I said. We're going to disconnect one of them and plug it into the video. For now, we're going to keep everything to the side, and we're not going to start routing into the case until we have everything all set. Like I said, connect everything that you can on the outside, if possible. Very good. I'm going to plug in the SATA ports. Very good. So now we leave everything connected to the side. And now we're going to put the case back on its face. This is where move everything you can out of the way. And we're gonna always be sure to put as many screws as you can on anything that you install on the case. Very good. So now we're gonna connect the main power to the cable extension we have already plugged in. Try your best to keep everything as organized as possible with non-modular power supplies. Cable management happens right at the beginning. As you're building, you just have to keep planning ahead the whole time. So push it in, match the pin with the correct side until you make sure that everything is nice and flat and connected all the way in. If you want to take it out, just wiggle the cable, because otherwise it's going to make it a little difficult to take it out, and then that's going to make it come out easier. But just push it all the way in. Then we look for the PCIe connector. The PCIe connection is the one that has the breakable tab that gives you the 6-pin connector or the 8-pin connector, which is what most graphics cards used to have as the standard. Now you have things like the 12-pin connector from NVIDIA and things like that that are being added, but this is still the most common that you're going to see in most GPUs. Very good. And then the one that splits up into 4 is the one that goes to I believe that's CPU power, the connection on the top on the motherboard. I believe that's CPU power, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Alright, very good. So now we have everything connected. It doesn't seem like it right now, but everything is plugged in. So we should be able to plug in the computer and get at least all of the light, and we can test the RGB to make sure that it works. Okay, make sure the fans are spinning, make sure everything is plugged in properly, and we're gonna go ahead and flip the switch to the on position. Light of the GPU turn on, so that's a good sign, and let's get started. And let's let's turn it on. So the RGB is not turning on, which means that the daisy chain is incorrect. With the RGB hub, your best option would be to just plug everything in. Everything that has the 3-pin female RGB connector, just plug everything into the hub, because otherwise it's very difficult to follow the daisy chaining. So I often skip that. Very good. So now that we have all the fans connected, we're going to start connecting all the RGB to the hub. So we'll just get the 3-pin connectors, match ones on the hub, and plug them in little by little. Make sure everything is plugged in. It is possible to daisy chain them, but it's very difficult to find where everything, find the correct combination. And just make sure that we have 5. Very good. So now that we have everything plugged into the hub, turn around. Now that we got everything connected, we're gonna go ahead and turn it on. Very good. Gonna go ahead and flip the switch to the on position. We got light on the GPU, so that's a good sign. And let's turn it on. Very good. Let's turn everything on, and then you're able to control it with the remote. Like I said earlier, this is actually a good time to test. I have another remote that I have from a previous build. Well, this is actually going to be for the 6th generation system, but it is possible to use a different remote, although I wouldn't rely on that. If you are going to get an RGB hub like that one, just make sure that you keep in mind the fact that losing the remote can lead to you having to get a new hub to be able to get a new remote. Alright, let's turn this off for now. When it comes to cable management, the way that I approach it is that I grab the sets of cables that attach each other and start tying them up. Usually this is where I would put in zip ties, but you're switching over to Velcro straps. Make sure that it's only, because this ones are pretty thin. You don't have to use Velcro straps, but they're relatively cheap and they are very helpful because it makes cleaning your case so much easier. But zip ties will work fine too. Stay away from the plugs when you're putting the cables close to each other. Don't worry too much about figuring out routing the cables. We just want to collect everything into small groups, cables, and have everything be in one place. And mind you, this is the way that I approach cable management. You might see other people do it differently, and everybody, I don't know if there's a proper way to do it, but this is how I do it. Very good. I'm going to put this aside for a little bit, and we're going to separate again the SATA. You're going to be moving and connecting and reconnecting things as you go along. Very good. So we're going to plug for so we're going to try to organize the cables as much as possible. We're going to do the same thing with the cables for the CPU. We're going to leave the SATA ports. One of the SATAs came off, so we're going to reconnect it later. Now we're going to grab all the remaining cables from the power supply, and we're going to put them together. Management. If you manage to do it without driving yourself crazy, then you're good. Here we go. Okay, very good. We're going to remove the power supply. This is where we're going to start pushing the cables into the case. So we're going to leave all the RGB stuff to the side as much as we can, of course. Put this around here, and we can start planning. I'm just going to tuck in the cables in there. Make sure everything stays plugged in. And that's going to have to be about as good as we're going to be able to get it. Okay, and now we only have to deal with the hub and the rest of the cables for the RGB. I would start off with start further away from the wall of the case, because when you put in the power supply, it's going to be a little off center. Very good. So now we start connecting to the point of the motherboard, and we route the cables to the closest mounting point we have. I'm going to tie all the rest of the cables to each other. Try to now we'll reuse and anchor it to the mounting point on the case. Still using the same without having to get another one or having to get cable cutters or anything like that. So I find this to be much better. So that's going to be it in terms of cable management for me. I'm going to go ahead and put the cover back on. There we go. And we're all set. Now I'm going to put some cable management up here. We can leave that like that, I think. Very good. Very good. And now we're all set.
Alright, here we go. Now that we're done with the build, we're going to go ahead and run a quick match just to check temperatures and check out system stability and everything, make sure everything is okay. We're going to run the system in a way that I don't recommend. We're going to set it up on max settings, running on 1080p on DirectX 12 under the Epic preset. So we're going to max out the settings to get so that way we can really push the system as much as possible, because DirectX 12 is going to use more of the GPU. So No, we are not going to get above 100 FPS with this configuration. I think that we'll be lucky if we go above 30. But this is really going to push the CPU and the GPU while it's running the game. I'm going to go ahead and count the FPS while I'm at it, but I mean, things are not looking great. Whopping 24 FPS cinematic experience with Fortnite over here. Let's see if we manage to get a kill with that. Temperatures are looking pretty good. CPU is maxed out at 100%. And GPU is right behind it, 95, 97, so that's good. That's exactly what I was hoping for. And yet we're still doing pretty good. Alright, let's see if we can manage to get a kill at 20 FPS. Alright, very good. So after completing the build, everything seems to be connected and stable. I checked all the drives, everything seems to be coming up. So as of now, I can say the system is ready. I do want to get a sag bracket for the GPU because it is a little lower on one of the ends. So after testing Fortnite, the temperatures seem pretty good. But you can base yourself on the overlay to give you an idea of the kind of performance that the case gives you. Remember, this is a small case, a relatively small case, so air gets trapped in there, and that's why you want to make sure that the power supply is always facing down. I actually, off camera, I tested what was the difference between the power supply facing up and the power supply facing down, and there's a noticeable difference. In terms of build quality, the case overall is very sturdy. It's a regular thin metal. It's very comparable to other cases that I've tested in the past, and the steel seems to be very good quality. The glass is nice and sturdy, and overall I thought it was a pretty good case. The space for cable management is good, again considering the size of the case. I really think ThermalTake could have done a better job at maybe increasing the height or the width of the case to try to help out a little bit with cable management. But overall, considering the space, they've done a pretty good job, especially with the removable caddy underneath for the SSD. It was very helpful. The fans are pretty good quality, but I do recommend the reverse blade fans to try to reduce temperatures inside the case. I saw the GPU even on max load staying at around 65 degrees, so I think it's pretty good. Alright, well, that was the build guide for the main test bench of the channel. I hope you guys find this useful, and if you guys have any questions regarding the build, feel free to leave any questions in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer as many as I can. The comment section is going to be the best way if you wanna reach out to me. I'm always happy to help fellow PC nerds with any questions you guys might have. In any case, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye bye for now.